Hello, thank you. I'm Neville from Dedaub. My background is in static program analysis. Today I'm going to be talking about one of our relative strengths at Dedaub, which is to conduct these studies for the changes in the EVM and see what contracts are going to be affected. So we're a security vendor for many protocols. This is a list of some of these protocols that we work for. We also produce tools. We have a contract library, which is an explorer, blockchain explorer, which contains an integrated decompiler within it. And we also produce Watchdog, which is a security product used by protocols to make sure that their protocols are safe, they're being monitored, and also they use static program analysis to find bugs in their code base. All right, we're also known as white hat hackers. Over the past couple of years, we've conducted several public vulnerability disclosures. Two interesting ones would be, for instance, the one for multi-chain. We've saved them over $1 billion that could have otherwise been hacked, and a CVE for Uniswap. All right, getting to the meat of the subject, the EVM never skips a beat. It's been running, but it's been designed over 8 years ago. So we need to upgrade the VM from time to time. There's Ethereum improvement proposals that facilitate, for instance, future upgrades, the conversion to have different data structures and things like that. And our contribution to this has been to conduct these impact studies. So there's two kinds of impact studies that we've done for the Ethereum Foundation. One of them is to analyze the change in gas semantics, and there's also other kinds of impact studies where we've figured out the changes in other semantical details of the EVM. And the engagement usually starts with the Ethereum team asking us, well, which smart contracts are going to break if we introduce this EIP? And we're only really interested in the most important smart contracts, to be honest, because if there's 50 million smart contracts deployed, it is bound to be at least one contract that will break, but it might not be critical. So, in the theoretical sense, our engagement really is to consider the semantics of the current EVM, which is, let's call it EVM, and the semantics of the upgraded EVM, let's call that EVM Prime. And theoretically, what we should be doing is to analyze for all smart contracts deployed, for all executions that they can possibly do, how many of them will break under the new semantics, which would not have otherwise been broken with the older semantics. And out of these, which ones are actually important to report? Now, of course, I'm using very unscientific language here, and there's many questions. What does all executions mean? What does break mean? And also, what makes a smart contract important? And to simplify things a little bit, for all executions that break, let's call that, for the time being, interesting executions. All right? Now, for all executions, when I say that, I usually mean static program analysis. And our team is, they're experts in static program analysis. These are some of the papers we've published just on static analysis of Ethereum smart contracts. There's others that don't have to do with smart contracts. And the flavor of program analysis that we use is called declarative program analysis, which was actually invented in the 80s, but was popularized by my co-founder, Yanis, who's sitting at the back. And it works in this way. So basically, we take the program. Let's consider the program on the left-hand side here. It's in an IR, which we can produce from our decompiler. And we turn this program into a database, so to speak. So we turn it into a relational construct. So if you can imagine relations like, for instance, variables or assignments, those can be represented as tables. And then after we turn this into a database, we can run queries on this and implement various program analysis algorithms. But we don't actually use a language like SQL to do these queries. Instead, we use Datalog, which is a logical language. And Datalog is usually implemented using the same techniques used in databases, but its strength lies in the fact that it can do highly recursive queries. And there's many program analysis algorithms out there, like data flow analysis and things like that, which do require this high level of recursion. So in this example here, you can see a snippet of a program which is trying to find loop boundary variable conditions, okay? And it does so, with very little effort in a few lines of code. Now, despite all of this technology and all of this sophistication, there's no way you can actually consider, all possible executions in general. So we need to simplify things a little bit. And one way to simplify things is to consider only interesting executions, and the second way is to abstract, okay? So let me give you an example here. Let's say we're doing an analysis on gas, and the Ethereum community is proposing to change the semantics of gas. Okay, so we might consider, for instance, based on our intuition, that there might be some failing functions which are low gas, which have a low gas budget. One example would be fallback functions. So these are usually called with 2,300 units of gas, which means that it is possible for us to enumerate all possible executions of these fallback functions. And we can consider many other cases like this. We may also consider dynamic analysis, which is not exactly all possible executions, but you can enumerate all past executions on chain as well. And here's another example of two ways in which we figured out whether there is any smart contract that can possibly parse RLP encoded data. So RLP, recursive length prefix, which is a kind of encoding which is used in some of the Ethereum data structures. And the way we solved this problem is we did it using two different ways. We used both static analysis and dynamic analysis. It's very interesting how we solved this in both cases. In the case of static analysis, we figured out that most RLP libraries will need to have a loop, and within that loop, they will need to do some comparisons with some unique constants, which don't typically occur in other programs. Okay, and these constants are actually in the spec of RLP. And we wrote an analysis for that, and we found a set of contracts. But we didn't stop there. We also tried an alternative mechanism where we use dynamic analysis. And over there, the intuition was also quite interesting. We figured out that RLP has a length field. But we also thought that RLP would be encoded as bytes in Solidity. And bytes, if you look at the Solidity ABI, it has a length field as well. And it's usually quite straightforward to find whether something is bytes or not. And so once we saw that there were these two length fields, and it was predictable where these length fields are, for instance, here we can see the length field of the Solidity ABI in yellow and of the RLP in blue. And if these two correspond to each other, and they're in the same place that you would expect them to be, then most likely that function is trying to decode RLP encoded data. Okay, so, and these two analyses corresponded to each other, and we could conduct a study based on some changes to that, change in format. All right, then there's another issue that we haven't mentioned. So how do we find important contracts? I mean, usually we can typically find like many contracts that are affected by EIPs. However, most of them are not really that relevant. I mean, they might be contracts that have been abandoned, contracts that, they were just deployed for testing purposes. So it's very important that we can find a subset which is important, because there's a lot of manual work involved then to do, for instance, inspections or for like reporting these issues to the actual projects. Okay, so here's a list of things that we found are interesting, that make a contract more interesting. Obviously, if it's part of a major protocol, then by default, that's probably an interesting contract. If it holds funds, also. But there are other things that are harder to establish. I'll give you just one example here. For instance, if a contract controls another contract which is important, Now, how do you establish whether one contract controls another contract? And for that, we had to develop many heuristics that, to figure that out, whether a contract has a credit or not with another contract as well. All right, so getting this information does require a lot of data engineering and ETL and a lot of infrastructure, but it's as much complexity as developing a blockchain explorer. Fun fact, that's why we also have a blockchain explorer. All right, so here's a summary of some of the results we've had. So this is one study we did for Verkle trees. So the Ethereum is going to potentially transition from a Merkle-Patricia tree to a Verkle tree structure, which enables light clients to efficiently run. And for that, there needed to be some changes to the gas semantics. So those changes would cost smart contracts an average of 26%. But we also discovered throughout the way that there were many pathological cases in popular projects that do cause that gas cost to balloon. And the Solidity compiler actually doesn't produce very good code for this kind of gas semantics. So we were also able to provide some advice on that as well. Another one was the removal of self-destruct. The impact studies were very important here because there were like 4 to 6 different approaches that were being proposed. And some of them were very complicated. So if a complicated approach was selected, then it would have made nodes more complicated to build and to maintain and all of that. So in this case, we found that a relatively simple EIP didn't cause a lot of havoc in the smart contracts that are on chain. But we did find a few projects that were affected, and they were obviously notified by our team and also by the community. Here's another interesting one. So for account abstraction, in this case, there was an EIP which implemented account abstraction, which hasn't been implemented yet. It's probably going to be, it doesn't seem to be pursued at this moment, but it changed the semantics of TX origin. And in this case, there were a lot of cases where we had found, for instance, in many major protocols, that people were using checks on TX origin and message sender to check whether you're doing a flash loan or something like that, to make sure that there weren't any economic attacks. There were also reentrancy, like checks that involved TX origin as well. So it ended up being a situation where we didn't find like deal breakers when it came to this, except for the economic attacks. And all the other issues that we had found, they seemed like they could easily be resolved by upgrading smart contracts. All right, so in conclusion, evaluating the impact of a set of changes to the EVM is a very difficult task because it involves a lot of sub-specialities, including, for instance, there's various kinds of static program analysis that we needed to implement. Also dynamic analysis, which also presents some challenges because there's a lot of data to go through. There's a lot of past executions. It's akin to, for instance, developing a different EVM, for instance, if you want to try a different semantics of the EVM, which takes time. So we have developed techniques in order to speed this up a little bit. And also blockchain indexing and ETL in order to find out what are important contracts and what are not important contracts. And also to conduct, simple studies while we are conducting the larger studies. Okay, so the impact studies that we have done, they have simplified design decisions for the evolvement of the EVM, have informed the community, and also averted issues in ecosystem contracts. So up there, if you click there, you get on our Twitter. Please follow us. And if you have any questions, I'll be outside in a couple of minutes. Thank you very much.